Perfect. So I've got the session recorded right now, and you'll get a follow-up email from me later on with a link to the recording, as well as what I hope are helpful guides that can help you navigate the animation tool. Especially if you're new to it, they should help you navigate it a little easier and get to know the tool more so that you can utilize that in your presentation. So let me put this in slideshow mode now. Hopefully you're all seeing it the right way. Yeah, it looks like you are. All right, so let's get started. So what is animation in PowerPoint? All animation is a feature that lets you add movement or sound to your presentation. To be quite honest, we're really going to focus on the movement today. I don't usually recommend adding sound to your presentations unless it makes sense to do so, but we're going to focus on the movement, and I will point out where the sound option is, just in case you want to play around with it, because it's always fun to test things. So when should you use animation in your presentations? There are a few reasons. The big one is to emphasize something very important. You might have some information on the screen, and there's one little tidbit that you really want people to focus on and take away when your presentation's over. Animation can definitely help you do that in a variety of ways. We're going to see all the types of different animation features that are available with PowerPoint. You can also illustrate a dynamic process. So if you've used PowerPoint before, you know that there are options like adding smart art or workflows, processes to your slide. And sometimes it helps to animate those parts of your smart art or process so that people can actually see visually how it works while you're talking about it. Animation can also be used to pace the delivery of information, which is what I've been doing this whole time. So you'll notice that each bullet that I'm sharing on screen comes up one at a time, and I'm actually doing that through animation. And it's because I don't want to slap everything on screen as one big block of text and go through it. A lot of times, I'm sure you've been to presentations that have where the speaker's done this. They'll put up a slide with a ton of info, and while that info might be very important to you, if you see a wall of text on screen, it can be very information overload, right? And you can use animation like I'm doing right now to determine when information actually appears on the screen. So all this info is on one slide, but I'm determining and managing when it actually appears so that I can go through at an easier pace for everybody to hopefully follow along with what I'm saying. And speaking of information overload, animation can definitely help your audience focus a little more. Again, throwing everything on one slide, text, images, in kind of a big jumbly mess can really just make your audience's eyes kind of glaze over, which is the last thing you want, right? So animation can be used to really point or highlight things on the screen that your audience should be focused on at the time, instead of kind of going all over your slide and trying to figure out, well, what's the most important thing I need to pay attention to? So we're going to go over, before a demonstration, some quick animation do's and don'ts that should help you as you're playing around with the animation feature in PowerPoint. So let's go over the do's first. Really, the biggest thing you could possibly do is to keep it simple. When we go into the demonstration, you're going to see that the animation tab in PowerPoint has so many options to animate stuff on your screen. There's going to be really subtle animations. Really exciting is what they call the category animations, where things kind of jump all over the screen. And all of those are cool to play around with at first, but your content is the most important part of your presentation, and the animation is really just supposed to kind of enhance it. You don't want it to be the star of the show. So I would recommend, when you're making presentations, especially in a professional settings, you want to stick to the more subtle category of animations that I'll show you in just a bit. You also want to make sure you keep the animations consistent. Again, there's going to be various categories of animations that you're going to see, from very subtle to very exciting, but you don't want to use all of them in one presentation, right? You want to keep things a little consistent, maybe choose 1, 2, maybe 3 different styles of animation and use them in a consistent way so it's not distracting to your presentation. You also want to make it easy to present. Just because you can add a million animations to your presentation Doesn't mean you necessarily want to. It gets difficult the more animations you have to plan around those animations. You have to test it out to make sure that things are working the way that you intend to when you finally present to your audience. And one thing to keep in mind that I think is really important is if you're doing a slide deck for yourself, it's a little easier to practice and work out those animations so that when you present live, they work out exactly as you intend. If you are creating a slide deck for somebody else, maybe a manager or somebody else on your team, it can be very kind of blindsiding to add animations to a presentation and not work with that person first who's going to be doing the presenting. They may not be used to animations. There's ways to do timing with clicks and things like that. And if they're not expecting those animations, you may want to steer clear of them, or at least talk to the person first before you just start adding animations to your slide deck. And also, one thing I will definitely emphasize is that when you start using animations and maybe start getting very good at them, really remember that adding animation takes time. If you're new to using animation in PowerPoint, it's not something you want to throw into your presentation at the last second. That's just going to be a recipe for disaster. Again, there are so many ways you can customize the animation. I always tell people you have to practice using them before you do this presentation live. And then something happens that you didn't test or weren't expecting, and things kind of go awry. You really need to take some time before you present to make sure the animation works exactly the way that you plan. So here's an example of that. This is a slide that I did many, many years ago when ITS was working with different clinical sites with NYP to move everybody over to Epic rather than the various electronic health record systems that different sites were using. And at the time, our CIO had the slide with all this information about the transition to Epic, but it wasn't quite making the point that he'd hoped for, at least in text. So he wanted to make it more visual. So what he wanted to do is have the Weill Cornell clinical sites show up with all those Epic logos like you see on the screen, then show the NYP sites with all the various systems that they were using, and then how they were going to look at the end all under Epic. And this animation, while very simple, you'll see now, you can see the clinical sites with NYP using the different systems like Allscripts and Athena Health, and then it goes into Epic. This animation isn't hard to do, but this took a lot of time just because there are so many logos and objects and headlines on the screen. And I gave myself a ton of time to put this together, to practice it, to make sure the CIO had time to practice with it so he felt comfortable using this animation. So again, if you're using animation, always, always, always practice it before you finally go live into the wild with it. Let's go into some animation don'ts. One thing that you'll realize when you're animating things in your slide decks is that you can control the speed at which objects appear on your slide. And one thing you don't want to do, unless you kind of need it to make a specific point, is make sure the animations you don't want them to be slow. So there we've got step one in this process. It came up pretty quickly, maybe within a second. But if I've got my second option here, step two showing up, that came out super slow. Same thing with step three. If something drags visually in your presentation, it's going to drag for everybody else in the audience. So I'll show you where that timing option is when you're animating so that things appear a little more quickly on screen. Also, please do not use the fun animations, at least without a purpose. So when I mean fun animations, here's our first step again. It just kind of wiped on the screen very easily. Same thing with step two. And now we've got step three kind of like bouncing in there, which, I mean, it's very cute, but in general, if step three is just bouncing in there and it's not consistent with the other ones, there's no point to it. It can be a little distracting. Again, you want to kind of stick with those more subtle animations. And talking about consistency, again, we want to use consistent animations, especially for something like a process that I've been showing in these examples. So again, we've got step one, it just wipes on screen. Step two kind of swirls in like a clockwise thing going on. And then step three is just its own thing. And again, that's very distracting, especially for a process where they should all be kind of the same. This one is a little more subtle. Don't animate against the flow. And what I mean by that is we've been seeing a process, step 1, step 2, and step 3, and that process moves down or rather in a downward motion. So when you animate, we've got step 1, and you'll see that step 1 actually animated up. Same thing with step 2 and step 3. They're all kind of animating up. And while that's not the worst thing in the world to show, you can actually change and customize your animation. So if you do have some type of visual flow on screen that moves up to down or left to right, you can change how that appears on screen so it goes with the flow rather than against it. And it's just a very subtle thing that you can do to really enhance your presentation. And the next thing that I always warn people not to do is this. Do not animate every letter on your slide. Obviously, I did it for this purpose to show you what it looks like because it is terrible. And I've seen people do this and it's not fun. Please don't do it unless it's for a very specific point. Again, just because you can doesn't mean you should. This is what most people in the audience will look like if you do this, at least in their head, they'll be like that. It's just too much for people to visually see on screen. So when we do the text animation just a little bit, I'll show you where that is so that you never touch it again. If you take one thing away from this presentation, do not animate every letter on your slide, please. All right, so let's get into the animation. Before I do that, are there any questions before I begin? I just want to double check. I don't see any. All right, so I will just move into the demo. And if you do have questions at any point during the demo, again, just stick them in the chat and I am happy to answer them. So I'm now in my PowerPoint creation mode, and I've got a few slides here that I want to go through with you to demonstrate where the animation works in these presentations. So one thing that's very important to note about this particular demonstration is I am working on the desktop version of PowerPoint on a Mac. If you're using the desktop Windows version of PowerPoint, you're going to see very few differences than what I'm showing on screen. Everything is going to be there. It's going to have the same functions in the animation tab, which is right here. Windows users also have an animation tab with the same features. They might be slightly off in another place, but they're all there. However, if you're used to using PowerPoint online in your O365 account, the online version, the animation tab varies a bit more significantly. There are some features that aren't going to be available. It's not quite as robust as the desktop versions of PowerPoint. So if you're really interested in learning the animations tool in PowerPoint, I highly recommend using either the Windows or the Mac desktop version. It just works so much easier. You'll have a lot more options to play with. And later on, if you want to do things in the online version, you can. But again, the animations have more options and is more robust in the desktop versions of Windows and Mac. So with that being said, let's get started. There's two types of animations we're going to go through the day. The one that we're going to talk about the most are animations on a slide. And the next one we'll talk about is transitions, which are the animations between slides. And that's going to be more towards the end. We're going to focus more on the animations you can do in your actual presentation. So let's go through the basics. Again, I'm in my animations tab in the taskbar of my PowerPoint application. And you should see something like this. You'll see some green stars, some yellow stars, and then a red star right here. And what the green stars are, those are entry animations. So that means you can animate something to appear on your slide. The yellow stars right here are emphasis animations, meaning you have an object that's already on the screen and you just want to animate it so that it becomes more prominent. And then the red star are just exit animation effects, which sound just like they are. It's you animate something to disappear or be removed from the slide. And anything that you can animate on a slide is called an object. So objects can be text or images or shapes like I've got right here on the screen. And to animate something, it's very easy. You go into your animations tab and you're going to click on the object that you want to animate. And in this case, I want to animate this concept or flow chart to show this concept 1 circle, then the arrow, and then the concept 2 circle, right? So I have this first concept 1 circle selected, and I want it to enter the screen. So all I have to do is go into my green star menu here, and I have more than 5 animations. I can actually click this little arrow drop down menu, and you'll see a ton more animations, and they're categorized from basic to subtle to moderate to exciting. And exciting are like the fun, crazy ones. And definitely, if you're new to PowerPoint animations, feel free to try them out. They can be fun to mess around with. But I'm probably going to stick today with the basic or subtle category. And I'm going to have this appear. I'm going to do a zoom so that it expands out. And PowerPoint's going to give me a very quick preview of what that animation looks like. So if I like it, I'll keep it. And if I don't, I can always change it. You'll notice too that a number 1 just appeared next to the circle. That's not going to appear when you actually present, but it's a visual indicator to you that this object has animated, and it's the first thing that's going to appear on the screen when the animation starts. So because I've animated something, I now have my animation pane on the right-hand side appearing. And it's going to be basically a list of objects that I've animated on my slide that I can then manage or customize from there on. So let's finish all the rest of the animations first and then customize it. So let's do the arrow. I want to do a wipe. And then concept 2, it's going to look, speaking of consistency, it's going to look like the first concept 1 and expand the same way. So here's my animation pane. I've got concept 1, the arrow, and then concept 2, and they show up in order 1, 2, 3. So you'll see this preview button at the top left here that I'm circling with my cursor. And if I click it, 1, 2, 3, that's what it looks like. We can customize this even further. So I'm going to select concept 1 in my animation pane, and you'll see effect options, which is a little menu here that I can start to customize my object. I can decide, this kind of changes depending on what type of animation you selected. But in this case, I can select the zoom property since that's the animation I picked, and I can have it zoom from the center of the slide or the center of the object. I'm cool with the default it's got there. I can decide what happens after the animation appears on screen, which is it could go away on its own or hide when I click my mouse next. In this case, I'm okay with it appearing on screen. I can also have it change into a specific color if I wanted to. So there are some options there. This is where you would add sound under effect options. So if I click on that, you'll see there are a ton of preloaded sounds that I could add. Again, please use these sparingly. They can be a bit distracting. Or if I click other sound, I can actually upload a file, a sound file that I have that would be in time whenever this animation appears on screen. No sound for today. I've also got this timing menu here, and this is where I can decide how or when the object shows up on screen. So in general, we've got 3 options here: on click, with previous, and after previous. So on click means whenever you're clicking, like hitting your mouse, hitting your space bar or a clicker, that's when the animation will happen. So that's obviously more manual and you can control it that way. If you want things to be more automated, you can actually group your animation with another one so that they all appear on screen at the same time or one right after the other, but there are fewer clicks that you have to worry about to do that. So we'll go through that in a little bit. But right now I'll have it on click. We've also got the duration, which again, that's the timing I was talking about. You don't want things to appear too slow. So Microsoft has this option here where you can go from very slow, which is considered to be 5 seconds, to very fast, which is half a second. I might do 1 second in this case, but you'll also notice that there's a little item here for me to customize it. I could do 10 seconds, 100 seconds if I wanted to. I don't think that would be very effective in this case in terms of this demonstration. We have so much time. So I'm going to do 1 second. And I can also add delays between animations, especially if I've automated it, and just put a number here in terms of seconds. I can even have it repeat if I wanted to, however many number of times I want it to, even into infinity until the presentation is over. And this might be helpful if you're in more of like a kiosk setting. Maybe you're at an event where you've got a monitor and you just want something looping on screen. Maybe you've got a process that you animated that you don't want to have to manually go in and show over and over. You can always just repeat it so that it does it and you don't have to worry about it. And it's just displayed there. We won't go into triggers today, and we'll go into text animations in just a second, but let me finish customizing the rest of these. So I'm going to click on the right arrow, and you'll see because we did a wipe, I can now change this to the property from top to bottom, from left to right, things like that. And the arrow is going from left to right, so that's exactly how I want to animate it. And I'll have it go on click, 1 second, and we'll do this one very quickly too. We'll just do it 1 second. So I can preview this again, but if I really want to see what this is going to be like when I have to present, you always want to go into slideshow mode, and I'm going to do that from the current slide. And this is where you can test things like the timing and the clicking. So I'm going to tap my space bar once, and there's concept 1, tap again, there's the next animation, and there is animation 3. So slideshow mode is the best way to test the animation to make sure it works. Preview is very good for quickly visually seeing how it's going to look, but the tapping and the timing, you want to do it in slideshow mode. The animation pane also lets you manage the order which things come out. So if for some reason I wanted concept 2 to come before the arrow, I could just select it and hit this arrow to kind of rearrange how they all show up. And if I wanted to delete an animation, I can just click on it and either hit delete on my keyboard or this red X, and it goes away. So that's how I would play with the animations there. So that's how to do basic animation in terms of just getting it on the screen. Let's talk about the next type of animation you can do, which is emphasizing concepts. So I have this quote from Michael Scott from The Office. Would I rather be feared or loved? Easy, both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me. So what I want to do is actually emphasize this part of the quote. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me because it's the punchline. And it's already on the screen. So all I want to do is emphasize it, which are these yellow stars right here. I'm going to expand that to see all the options, again, from basic to exciting. And I'll keep it a little more subtle. I'll highlight it with or emphasize it with font color. So I'm going to click on that and you'll see it changes into this default orange. I've got that number 1 appearing, showing that I have animated it. And if you look at my animation pane, you'll see that the star is yellow, meaning that it's emphasis animation. So this is a good way also when you've got a lot of animations on one slide to see what everything is doing in one place. If I go back into the properties, I can do what I did in the previous slide, which is just play around with things like how I want it to look on screen. So maybe I want it to be purple and not the orange. Again, what happens after the animation, adding sound, the timing, I'll leave it as it is. But let's go into this new menu that popped up that says text animations. So if I expand that and scroll up, you'll see that there are options to animate the text all at once, by word or by letter. Again, by letter is what you do not want to do. So now that you know where it is under text animations, don't ever look at it again. Most of the time, I would really recommend doing all at once. I think that it's better in terms of emphasis with text animations on screen. And you can also decide how you want to animate text as a group. So we've got some option here as one object, paragraphs, first level. What all this means is, let's say you've got a block of text that's bulleted, right? And it has sub bullets and maybe other things. You can actually animate how they appear on screen. Maybe you don't want the whole block to show up at once. Maybe you want it to go bullet by bullet. You would do something like first level and have it animate 1, 2, 3, 4 that way, so that you don't have to separate the blocks of text into their own individual bullets. So this is where you would go into group text to decide how those are going to be timed on screen. So again, now I can preview it. And that's what it's going to look like when I click on, when I'm presenting on that slide in slideshow mode. People are going to see this purple text to emphasize text. Any questions so far about animation or the animation pane? Let me just double check before I move on. All right, let's go into the next one. So this is a cool trick that I like to show people in terms of timing, how to make objects appear and disappear or transition and morph on screen. So an example of that was the Epic slide that I showed you a little while ago, where the logos go into all the different EMR systems and then all turn into Epic. The way I did that was I've got these two objects on screen. I've got this Nokia brick phone that I think everybody had at one point. I know I did. And then a smartphone. And I want to show the Nokia disappearing to make way for the new technology that we use, which is the smartphone, through animation. So the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to put the Nokia here. Hold on, let me move that out of the way. And it's appearing on the screen, and I want it to fade away, right? Now we're going to go into the red stars, which are the exit animations. And let me find where that fade is, right here. So we've got a fade animation. If I go into my pane right here, you can see the red star showing that that's animated to leave the screen. And then I've got my smartphone. I'm just going to put it on top so it looks like it's coming from the same place. And I'm going to have it enter in the same way with a fade. Boom. So let's see what that looks like really quick in slideshow mode. So I've got, here's the Nokia, I click, it goes away, and then I've got the smartphone. That's not quite what I wanted. I want it to be a little more seamless. I don't want to click so many times to have something disappear and then reappear. So let's go into talk about timing. So here's our timing menu right here. And I want object 2, which is the phone, the smartphone rather, to appear with the previous animation. And when I do that, you can see that both of the objects are now number 1, meaning those animations are tied together and they're going to appear at the same time. So now when I go into slideshow mode and we have the Nokia and I hit my space bar, boom, the Nokia disappeared and the smartphone appeared at the same time. So those two animations were tied together. It had a more seamless effect, and I only had to click once in this case instead of multiple times. So that's how you can play around with timing to make maybe more automated animations, to have to worry about clicking less, to make things look a little more seamless. And let's move on to smart art. You can animate smart art as well. So I have it selected here, and I've got a 3-step process that's going from left to right. And let me go back into my animation pane. There we go, my animation tab. So I want this to be animated in some way. And I'll go into my entry effects, and we'll probably do a wipe. That probably makes sense. All right. So right now it's wiping up. Again, let's go into our properties and effect options and go from left to right. So if I preview that, all right, perfect. It's going from left to right and it looks pretty good. But Smart Art has its own animation options that you can see here at the bottom, Smart Art Animation. And this determines how each of these steps appears on the screen. So we've got 3 options here in the dropdown, which are all at once, or rather as one object, all at once, and one by one. So the first 2 sound very similar, but as one object means this entire Smart Art is going to be treated as one entity and be animated all the same way across the screen. So that's what I have selected now. And if I preview it, you can see it just wipes across the screen. Actually, let me make it a little slower. So it goes 1, 2, 3 right across the screen. If I do all at once, it's slightly different in that PowerPoint recognizes that step 1, step 2, and step 3, and the arrows are kind of their own thing, own parts of the Smart Art. So if I preview it now, you can see that they don't wipe as one entity across the screen. They all animate individually as their own thing, which you might want to do in a presentation. It really depends on the point you're trying to get across. And then I've got one by one. So this is helpful when I've got something like on click. And let me do it in slideshow mode to show what that looks like. So if I wanted to go step by step through the process in presentation, one by one lets me go at my own pace where I might be talking to you. And then when I move on to the next step, then I might click my screen or my keyboard and have those come up one by one as I'm talking to you so that all the steps don't appear on the screen at once. And I can kind of pace myself as I talk about this process. But each part of the smart art in one by one is animated on its own, including the arrows in this case. There may be instances where, let me get rid of that animation really quick. You might want to animate just one part of a smart art, maybe step 3 in this case, for example. If you wanted to break up the smart art and just animate pieces of it, not all of it, you have to ungroup it first, which usually you just have to select your smart art, right click it, and you will see an option to ungroup. Mind you, that changes the smart art. You can't reanimate it together again. But if I ungroup it, actually, let me ungroup it one more time. There we go. You can see now they're all individual pieces that I can animate. And if I go back into my animations tab, maybe I can just animate this step right here, which I did on its own without messing with any of the other ones. And I did that just by ungrouping all the objects from each other so that I can focus on each individual piece to animate. And this probably, I think, is the funnest part of animation, which is path animation. So there may be instances where the animations that PowerPoint has given you don't measure up. You need to do something super customizable. You need things to move across the screen in a way that is very specific to your presentation, right? And in this case, I've got these 3 objects, 1, 2, 3, these circles, and I want them to fly into this funnel. And there's not really a pre-programmed animation that can do that for me from these stars, right? So there's an option here called path animation in PowerPoint. And when I expand it, this lets you create paths or draw paths on the screen that your objects will then follow to move exactly how you need. And you can do these free form, which are all available in the top category called custom, or there are some pre-programmed ones where you can actually just do like an arc and it draws it for you and the animation moves, more easily from left to right, let's say. And the pre-programmed ones are nice because if you try to draw on screen freeform, sometimes it's not as pretty as you would hope, but it'll get the job done. So it's really depending on what you need. But I like path animation because I feel like it's very helpful for odd diagrams like this one, or perhaps you've got scientific figures in your presentation that you need to move in a specific way, and you can do that with path animation. So the way it works is I've got object 1 selected, and I want to do a free form in this case, so I'm going to draw it. And you'll see that my cursor, it's a little tiny on your screen perhaps, but it's a crosshair. And I'm just going to select object 1 and hold my cursor down and just draw in here. And I'm going to double click to end the path, and boom, there goes object 1 into the funnel. And there's my path, which isn't pretty, but it got there. All right, let's just say that. I'm using a trackpad. Please have mercy on me. And I can just do that with all of my objects. Again, going to path animation. I'm going to do it free form, holding down my cursor to go into the funnel and double click when I'm done, and show you that one more time. Path, free form, click and hold down your cursor. Ooh, that one's going to be a little weird to draw, and then double click and it's done. So now when I preview that, this is what that whole animation is going to look like when I present it, which is kind of cool. I could probably clean it up a little more so it looks smoother. But this is how path animation works. And you can see on the right-hand side, you can customize path animation however you need it to, just like all the other animation options we talked about. And really quickly, let's talk about transitions. So transitions are the animations between slides. So if you want to add a little movement from one slide to the next, you can do it with transitions. So I'm going to add a little wipe, which is what you saw on the screen right there. So to see what that actually looks like, let's go from slide 18 in the slideshow. So here's our slide. We go through the animation, blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to move to the next slide where I added a transition. And boom, it just kind of subtly wipes across the screen, which is a nice effect to add. And it's subtle. So I would recommend maybe playing around with transitions in the tab here to see if you like them. You don't have to add transitions manually to each slide, especially if you have a long presentation. You can actually just hit apply to all right here, and it will add that transition to every single slide. So thankfully, you don't have to go one by one and add it. I see a question from Octavius. How do you add the GIF? Okay, so the GIF is just a file that I pulled from a website, and I just copy and pasted it in there. And GIFs do play in slideshow mode, so you can always just add them, and it's their own kind of animation, but it's completely separate from PowerPoints. I have a question from Bernice. How do you make an object flash repeatedly? So let me go back. Let me actually delete these animations. Let's focus on this one here. Go back to my animations tab. I actually want to see if there is a flash. I'm looking to see if there's a flash animation really quick. There's a pulse one. There we go. There's a pulse one here. So that's under the emphasis. And if you wanted to have it repeat, all you have to do is go into your animation pane under timing and just have it repeat forever, I guess, until you maybe go to the next slide or it ends. So hopefully that helps you, Bernice. Any other questions about animation? That was, for the most part, kind of simply going through the features of animation. Obviously, there are a ton of options available, and let me just go into here. I mean, there's so many. If I expand these options, you'll see there are so many animations that you can play around with. You've got your exit effects, again, the path animations, and then you've got your animation pane that you can always pull up to manage your animations. I didn't get into triggers today. That's something that takes a little more time to get into, but it also helps with some timing and automation of your animations. I'll send you in the follow-up email a link to how to use triggers. So if you're interested in using them, you definitely can and play around with that as well. Feel free to put any questions you'd like in the chat. Oh, and one quick thing that I forgot to mention, you may have noticed that every time I add animation to a slide like this one, if you go into the timeline menu all the way to the left in PowerPoint, you'll notice a little comet icon next to this same slide. And all that icon does is it's a visual indicator that I added animation to this particular slide. So when I'm putting my whole deck together, I can quickly see, oh, okay, I added animation, maybe I should test it. Or maybe I'll see, oh, I was supposed to add animation to slide 14 and I didn't because the icon's not there. Let me quickly do that before I present. So anytime you add animation, you'll see this little comet icon on the slide, and it's a very nice reminder that you've got animation going on there and maybe you want to test it, or maybe it's not supposed to be there and you should delete it, but that's what this means. And for anybody who signed on a little late, I am recording the session, so I'll be sending a follow-up email to everybody who registered to whatever email you used when you signed up for this session. I'll send you an email with the recording as well as some guides about animation in PowerPoint. I don't see any other questions. I'm hoping that means I explained it well enough. Kenneth, that was a well-curated overview of PowerPoint animations. Oh, no problem, Kenneth. I'm really glad that it was helpful. Thanks to you, Alexis and Stacy, as well, for joining us and spending time today learning about animations. If you do think of a question after the session is over, please feel free to just reply to the email I send you. I'm happy to help as much as I can. And if I don't know the answer, I do have know the resources that I can point you to help you out. But I really hope that you use animations in some of your upcoming presentations. You can see that they can be very, very subtle and just kind of paste information, emphasize really important points, and hopefully make your presentations a little more polished. And thank you so much for joining Tech Tuesday today. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about things you can do in PowerPoint. So have a great rest of the day and expect an upcoming email from me later on. Have a good one, guys.